did learn some things. We engaged in some heroic efforts to do our best to get kids to learn. And one of the things we learned was to focus on what students know and what they don't know. A portion of our minutes in physical school are spent on things that students have already learned. In distance learning, we don't have time for that. We need to focus on what students know and what they don't know. We also need to address students' social and emotional needs. Not just students, but also the adults who support them. And we know that ineffective approaches to teaching and learning didn't suddenly get better just because we were in a digital space. We built this playbook trying to help you all with the best learning we could with learning for our students and ourselves. So we're going to start at the end of this book, Learning, Distance, or Otherwise. And we are joined with John Hattie, who is, I think, at like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning in Australia. John?
Yeah, it is. It's nice and early here, and it's really wonderful to be with you and Nancy and all those people that are on this session here today. And certainly, as you said, Doug, it's technology, it's the distance, it's remote learning. We all have credible words for this. But we have to remember that there is an incredible amount of research about the circumstance already out there. And certainly as we look at what works and what works best, we can mobilize that research to bring it to the occasion. There have been 21 meta-analyses on the effect size of distance learning, about 7 million students. It's a pretty reasonable data base to base on. And when you look at the overall effect, it's 0.14. Now, the wrong interpretation of that is that distance learning is hopeless. That is not the message at all. It's a complete different message. It means that when you do teaching and learning by distance, compared to the regular classroom, the difference between the two is pretty trivial. It really doesn't make a difference overall. Yes, we're going to see there are some advantages of doing it in class, and there are some advantages of doing it by distance, but it all balances out. And that's why the subtitle of our book is Teaching for Engagement and Impact in Any Setting. And we're going to see that what we have to do as we go to not having the kids in the classroom in front of us, there are some things we can do different, there are some things we can do better. But overall, we have to remember it's not the medium that matters, it's the methods we use that matters. Distance is just a means to an end, and that end in terms of what we're going to talk about today, particularly in terms of teacher clarity, attending to the learning strategies. Introducing a word we don't often hear in education, efficient. And we're going to find that sometimes the students are more efficient when they do things over the distance compared to in the regular classroom, and we should optimize that opportunity. And many of the cases that there are different ways and different times that students get towards the desired outcomes. The meaning of all this means that we need to focus on many of the things that we've been doing in the regular class, and many of the times they're highlighted. Yes, there are some things that we can't do as well in distance. It's harder to talk, as we often do in the regular classroom, and that is something that is not so effective on the distance learning mode. But it does mean we can move more into a triage situation in terms of listening to the students' learning and being involved and giving them more effective feedback and worrying about whether that feedback is actually received. Distance learning is not an accelerator, but it's not a negative. We need to view the technology in terms of planning lessons, creating resources, and we'll certainly see that one size doesn't fit all when you do it distance, so more individualization about what can happen as the students go through the lessons. And it is the decisions we make as students are learning. As we listen to them thinking out loud, and we're going to come back, that's going to be a really important one. And as we give them alternative strategies, as we don't see them as working at home alone, but working at home with other students in various tasks, and to jointly advance their learning as we formatively evaluate our impact. That's so critical. And so we're going to focus on the learning process. We're going to focus on looking for great practice, great platforms, processes, and to really optimize the opportunity that's given to us on the distance learning. Now, technology has been around a long time. Dylan Williams says it's the technology, the revolution that's been coming for the last 50 years. Over the last 50 years, the average effect size from the 200 plus meta-analyses on technology is very low, 0.2, 0.3. And one of the messages that in the typical old grammar of schooling, technology has not made a great difference. But here, in this distance COVID times, we have an incredible opportunity to optimize the power. Like if you look at the effect sizes on the current technology, we find the effect size goes up dramatically, 0.54 when we use interactive video, 0.42 when we use intelligent tutoring systems. And the message here is that one of the most powerful forms of technology in the regular classroom is using it in terms of its social interaction aspects. That is the very thing that obviously we're going to optimize in the distance learning situation. Like getting students to talk about their errors and the mistakes they make. We struggle to get that from kids in the regular classroom. The only kids that put their hands up to ask questions and are the kids that know the answers already. We have to get the kids that don't put their hands up to ask questions. And even some of our students who become incredibly dependent on teachers. They want to know what to do next. Where do I go next? Well, through the social media and through the social interaction forms, they're more likely to talk about those things. So certainly in the distance learning, we have an opportunity to hear more thinking aloud. We have an opportunity for kids to talk to each other about what they know and what they don't know. And we have an opportunity for them to talk to us about what they're struggling with, and struggle is a good word, and how they can give more feedback to us about where they're at, how they check for their understanding. And also getting that balance right between precious knowledge, the surface level, the knowing that, and the deep thinking, the relation, how we relate ideas, and the knowing how. Of course, we want both. But in the old grammar of schooling, in the typical classroom, online typically favours the knowledge consumption, the Mrs. Series, the Mrs. Googles. Whereas we need to get the balance right and use the distance to have not only getting the precious knowledge, but using the technology and using the opportunity of kids working not in front of us every day to get to that deep thinking. Now, all that means we're going to have to not think of the situation as crisis teaching, but we have to think of it as a cohesive instruction across platforms. And to build the base of that, we need to get the teacher-student relationships right. Nancy.
And those teacher-student relationships are absolutely critical. You know, in the spring of this year, one thing that most of us were able to leverage was the fact that we had established relationships with our students already as we went into this rapid deployment of crisis teaching. As we're moving into the fall, in the next couple of weeks as schools start, most of us are going to have students in front of us that we don't know and that don't know us. So it really will be just like it is that we do every year, establishing those important relationships. Now, strong teacher-student relationships rely on effective communication, that there's a lot of communication that is happening between the teacher and the student, and that there's a willingness on the part of both to be able to address problems and issues and so on when they do arise. A second aspect of that is that not only do we need to foster those positive student relationships, but we also need to be able to set those fair expectations for them, organize and manage their learning and what that looks like. All of those contribute to those strong positive relationships. However, what can happen is what is sometimes referred to as a chilly classroom climate. And as John pointed out earlier, this is not something that is unique simply to an online learning platform. Chilly classroom environments have been around for as long as we've been talking about students. Here's some interesting research that's been done about that, and I'll draw your attention over to the left side of the screen there. There was a large-scale study that was done looking at teacher treatments of students who they perceived as being high-achieving versus low-achieving. And what they documented in particular were a whole laundry list of things that overall contribute to this idea that some students believe that they're an unwelcome intrusion. I'll give you just a moment to look at those. It's pretty chilling to think about the fact that it's very possible that for some students, whether they're in a face-to-face environment or whether they're in an online environment, confront every day a situation where they feel that they are not welcome, that they're not valued within the classroom. And the idea in particular of like fewer eye contacts, fewer questions that are aimed towards them, it really helps you to see why that is perceived as a chilly climate. Something that we're concerned about in particular is that in an online platform, there is yet another tool that can unintentionally convey this chilly classroom to certain students, and that's the mute button. And I'm not talking about muting the class because of background noise, but rather we've already heard stories of students who were perceived as being disruptive in one way or another, and the teacher simply muted their microphone. That's something that every student in the class notices, as well as the student that happened to. And when a teacher is perceived as disliking a student, it's obvious to everybody else in the class. In fact, the evidence is that kids can accurately report who it is that the teacher likes and who it is that the teacher doesn't like. So what we want to do is not only establish those important student-teacher relationships, finding out what they're interested in, learning their names and how to pronounce their names accurately, greeting them every time that they come into a live session, making sure that we're asking questions. All of that contributes to a teacher's credibility. And a teacher's credibility is considered to be a strong influence on learning. In fact, it's very likely to have an accelerating effect on their learning. What do we mean by teacher's credibility? Well, in particular, it really circles around these four ideas around trust. Do I perceive that my teacher is trustworthy, is benevolent, has my best interest at heart? Do I perceive as a student that my teacher is competent and organized in what it is that he or she is doing? Do I perceive that my teacher has dynamism or passion for not only the subject matter, but also for the fact that he or she is teaching and teaching me? And finally, as a student, do I perceive that that teacher has a sense of immediacy, responsiveness, closeness to me, even when we are at a distance? It's important to note that this is all dynamic, meaning that it's not the same for every student at every single time. It's something that we're continually working on because it's all about the student's perception of the teacher. And so in particular, when it comes to online learning, some places that we can really lift that up is around dynamism in particular. What's your enthusiasm for your students and for your subject that you're teaching? It's about showing up and looking professionally, even if you happen to be teaching from home. It's about a perception that you are prepared, that you care about your content, and that you utilize all of those tools that you have to be able to show and demonstrate the amount of immediacy that you have. Immediacy is related to accessibility and relatability. So make sure, in particular, to use gestures that can be seen on camera when you're talking, to look at them and to smile. Pay attention to your facial expressions. Call on students by name, and make sure that you're using pronouns like we and us to continually build that learning climate that you want students to participate in. And finally, think as well about what, we love this term, pop-up pedagogy. What are your touch points even when you're not in a live session? How is it that you can remain present in your students' learning lives even when you don't happen to be in front of them? And a number of tools include things like sending messages to families or asking them an intriguing question. Do you wonder why your cell phone battery dies? We're going to be learning about that tomorrow in science. Posting photographs for them, customizing the directions by using your voice in a short video rather than writing out all the directions. They get to see you, and that's what really matters. In addition, we know that teacher clarity is also essential at a distance. Doug?
Thank you, Nancy. So when this all started happening, we already had relationships with our students, and we leveraged those relationships to continue their learning through pandemic teaching. So I was getting really worried about starting the school year from a distance. And I was complaining about this to a friend, and my friend said, you know, people develop relationships online all the time, right? And I looked at him like, because I'm thinking student and teacher, and he's like, I met my wife online 20 years ago. We only dated online for a while. So I thought, oh, that brings me some comfort. I forgot. We do know how to develop relationships. We can develop healthy, productive student-teacher relationships if we work at it. As Nancy said, the next part we're going to spend time on is around teacher clarity, another high effect in the visible learning database. And teacher clarity has a number of parts. For example, the clarity of organization. Do the lessons, tasks, and assignments and activities link back to what kids are supposed to learn? Now, the reality for a lot of us in crisis teaching was we grabbed what we could and we put stuff out. And it may have been more tasks that were random to have some time. And I'm not going to beat us up about that because we were doing the best we could. But as we move forward, we need to think through teacher clarity. Are the tasks and assignments lined up to what we want kids to learn? And then we have to communicate our expectations to students. We have to be very clear, here's what we're learning today, here's why we're learning it. Now, I never said we had to do that at the outset of the lesson, but somewhere we should let students know what they're supposed to be learning. So I give you a couple examples. This is from some teachers in Fresno, and this is one of the platforms. And they, this teacher is saying, here's what we're going to learn, and here's what success looks like. And as part of the conversation, they're going back through this again. Like, don't forget, this is what we're going to learn. This is how we know we're successful. This is from a biology teacher who shared with us and said, I want every page of my learning management system, every single day when they come in, I want them to know what it is we're learning today, what success will look like, and then what relevance is. How will we know we've learned it? I think these can get better and better for our students, that we can be very clear because we're not physically with them all the time to keep reminding them of what we're learning, how the tasks line up, what success looks like, and why we're learning some of these things. Another example, this is another teacher from Fresno. Here's my learning intentions. Here's the task. Here's the success criteria. But in this case, the teacher had students use the tool and they annotated where they were now. So at the beginning of the lesson, where you are in your learning, and then later in the lesson, where are you in your learning? And that helped them think about, what does success look like? And did I attain that? And if not, my teacher can keep teaching me. That leads us to, when we're very clear on what we want kids to learn and what success looks like, we have to design engaging tasks. Now, this teacher, elementary teacher, was working with code.org, and she would have students, she would drop into the chat on a regular basis. Here's the success criteria. And so I've been thinking about this, and I had a conversation with a group of teachers on Monday, and we're going to create a bunch of class jobs, like we had at school. And one of the class jobs is the success reminder. A student will keep reminding us of what success looks like. Another is going to be the chat monitor. Another is going to be the mood monitor. Another is going to be the tech support for the teacher. And the last job we were thinking about is a DJ, so that at breaks, somebody gets to play some music. Now, there are probably way more jobs that you all can think about, but let's not forget that we had classroom jobs in physical school, and we can still give kids jobs in distance learning. How do we create engaging tasks? So we know what we want students to learn. We know what success looks like. And now we turn to engagement. John?
Yeah, the question that we want to ask you here is, if I said to you, how do you know your students are engaged? What do you mean by the concept of engagement? And I really want you to think of your answer here. Just to say a few words to yourself. What do you mean by students being engaged? Because we went out and asked many hundreds of teachers here in Australia over a project we've been doing over the last couple of years. And what struck us is that the majority of view of what teachers mean by engagement was doing. The students were doing the tasks. The students were completing the tasks. The students finished the work. And for a lot of students, sadly, there is not a lot of learning in doing. And some students, particularly as they get through to middle school and high school, they don't want to just keep doing. And one of the things we certainly can find as we go to a more distant situation is that getting kids engaged and just doing is going to be a real struggle. And so what we've been looking at is a different alternative way of thinking of engagement. Now, we have a 6-level model of engagement. And the doing part of it is very much in the participating. They're doing the work. They're paying attention. And what we invite you to do in the distance mode, and when that finally gets over and they come back to class, how we can bring back better into the regular class, moving from participating to investing to driving. And how we therefore have to think of constructing our activities for our students through the distance mode to allow them to move from participating to investing to driving. And certainly, reiterating the earlier comment, some of our students will be quite efficient. In fact, I've heard quite a few of our students saying, I get through the work so much faster at home than I do at school. And then there's a pause and they say, what do I do? What do I spend all that time in school doing when I can do it at home a lot faster? And in many senses, that's a good concept. And this is the notion of efficient learning. And so giving students tasks to do where they're involved in just doing is not going to be not good enough. But structuring tasks so we move from the participating to the investing and the driving. And look at the other end. Well, disrupting is going to be actually less at home because there's sometimes not many other kids to disrupt. And some of our kids that are quite disruptive in the regular classrooms actually may perform better if we get them past just the doing and get them to invest in driving. And it may mean that we are very good at choosing less to cover and allowing the students to go deeper in fewer content areas. And using this as an opportunity to do both the surface content level and to allow them to go deeper. Yes, some of them will avoid, and yes, we know some of the students, they are going to struggle to even get to the first page to do work. And for many kids, home is not a safe haven. School is a safe haven. For many kids, their parents weren't trained to be teachers, and many of them, parents think of their job as surveillance police, and that's not a very comfortable position. And so getting them past that avoiding to withdrawing and getting them into that participating, investing, and driving is what we're aiming for. So the message here is that we want you to think of engagement in a different way that many of us think about in the regular classroom. Particularly through the distance, and when we bring back better to the in-class, think of engagement as how we get students to participate, to move them to drive and strive. Doug, you're going to put some meat around. Sorry. Yes, Doug.
Yep, thank you. So this is one of the benefits of this, and we have to look for some of the positives. I've never seen this model of engagement before, and I love it. I think it's so descriptive and so powerful. So we started doing professional development just on that slide that John had up there around what is the difference between disengagement and engagement, And we reflected. In the spring of 2020, we got kids to participate. But now our job is to move to driving. So at our school, I work at a school with about 750 students. We decided one of the classes we would maintain over the whole summer through summer school was nutrition, foods, family, consumer sciences. Now in the past, we bought the food and they made the things in class like some of us remember from school. So they would make the cookies or the pancakes or the pizza or whatever right at school. So we decided, well, that's not possible. So what if we delivered the foods to their houses on Tuesdays, and they would engage in a series of lessons to learn about the nutrients and the parts and all this. So there is a part of it that is participating. And when their teacher goes through a live lesson with them, they participate. They cook alongside her. Now, the school I work with, it has students who live in poverty, and now we're supplying foods to their home, and they're cooking for their families. But this is participating. Right now, we say, okay, so this Ms. Enriquez is modeling for it. You're engaging, you're participating, you're doing all this. But that's not enough. Eventually, they have to document their own learning. So they have to take from the choices what they want to do. Now, if you look at the mom in the picture on the left, super happy with her daughter's cooking. And then we thought, okay, that's moving them to a little bit further. But how could we get them to drive? And so we started saying, after you do the participating with the whole class, that one, and then you choose something else to make from the choices that you have, and you start driving your own learning, you have to seek feedback from other people. And you have to record the feedback. And then you have to react to the feedback that you got. And so we started having students video their family's reaction to the food that they had prepared, and then writing a response to the reaction from their family. And all of a sudden, the engagement, the motivation, the attendance increased dramatically. And then we started saying, how could this idea of moving from participating to driving, how could this go across all of our subject areas, all of our curriculum areas? So we have a PD question, how in our professional learning, how can you move from creating tasks that allow for participation to driving? And one of the ones we did was focus on the racial divide in COVID. And students proposed their research questions in their math class to say, well, what do I want to learn about distribution? What do I want to learn about exponential growth? They started doing this. On Monday, I watched a lesson with third graders, and they were reading a book, and the teacher said to them, let's open our Google Doc. Your name is in one of the squares in the Google Doc. As a review, grab some images from the internet that remind you of things that have already happened in the book, and then type underneath it why you chose that image. And all of a sudden, wow, they're populating this Google Doc, they're typing in, they're commenting on each other. So what would have happened in the past, the teacher reviewed what we already know from this book, became what the students did. They found images, they typed in, they commented on each other. They started thinking about their own learning. And as we move into this, engaging the tasks to determine, not the tool. The purpose of what we want kids to learn should allow us to figure out the tool for their learning, not the other way around. So yes, I'm thinking all these cool things like Padlet and Seesaw, but I was getting a lot of stress, like, oh my gosh, I don't know this one, I got to go learn this. Oh, I don't know this one, I got to learn this. And I was using the task, like, here's this cool thing, I'm going to make kids do it, rather than, what's the purpose of this task? So we put in a few common things. For example, finding information. We've all been finding information. Some of us are old enough to remember going to the library physically and going to the card catalog and having little index cards to write down our notes, and then going to the stacks to find things and then photocopying them and going home, and that's how we found information. There are lots of new ways to find information. That's not the only way to find information now. We don't have to know every possible way to find information, but we have to know at least one way, and our students can know other ways, and that shouldn't cause us stress. We should focus on the functions that we need students to accomplish, not the specific tools.
Now,
and as we think through this,
feedback.
yep.
There you go, Doug.
That's you. I was going to say, and now we think about feedback from John.
Yeah. So we know that feedback is one of the most powerful forms of influence. And we certainly have argued that to maximize that power of that feedback, it's not so much about the feedback we give. Because as teachers, we actually give lots of feedback. It's more about the feedback that is received. And it's not only the feedback that's received by the student, but it's the feedback that's received by the teacher. And we've spent a lot of time looking at how we can listen into how students hear the feedback, how they understand the feedback, and how they go about using that feedback in various actions. And the starting point from a student point of view is the credibility of the person giving the feedback. That relationship that Nancy was talking about, that's so critical to build. And we always have to remember that building those relationships is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. And building good relationships means that students are more likely to give you feedback about what they don't know, what they're struggling with, where they're having problems, what their misconceptions are, how they go about their thinking. And so building that relationship so that that feedback is at least listened to. But listened to is not enough. We have to make sure that they've interpreted it. And so the beauty of the social media platform is that they're more likely to have questions to you, engagement with you about what they know and they don't know. And so the nature of those interactions can be quite rich using the social media. And certainly even when you come back to the in-class, making sure that you use the social media in the regular classroom, because it's one of the most powerful ways of getting that feedback heard, listened to, and actionable. And so how we can take this as an opportunity to increase the quantity of feedback information received by the student. But let's not stop there. It's also an incredibly powerful way for you as the teacher to get feedback about what you're doing well. And even looking in the chat room as we go through the seminar, the number of times where teachers say, I had to scrap that lesson, I had to start again, because we're much more keenly aware using the distance about what is working and what is not working in terms of what we're doing. And so that feedback's a two-way street. But switching the whole conversation and feedback from the giving of it to the receiving of it is the message here today. This notion of a formative evaluation. Like when Michael Scriven invented the notions of formative and summative, he never used the notion of formative and summative assessment. And I think it's led down a whole garden path of not a very desirable way of seeing the terms. It's not about the assessment. It's about the interpretation that you make during the lessons, the formative, or at the end of the lesson. When the cook tastes the soup, it's formative. When the guest tastes the soup, it's summative. And so using the distance notions to maximize both the formative so that we learn about how we have to adapt, talking with the students. How we also can look at certain moments where it's summative and really appreciate that that's the moment to ask the question with your students about how well we collectively have attained the success criteria. And it brings it really, really nice together. And from that information, we really want to know four things. We want to know what has been achieved. We want to know, given the student's ability, which things that they were able to achieve that, given their ability, we didn't expect them to. That's their strengths. What about the things, given their abilities, we expected them to get right, but they didn't get right? Those are their gaps. And quite often, the easiest way to fix gaps is to reteach. And that sometimes is the most powerful way of giving feedback, is to listen what they're misunderstanding, they don't know, they haven't got right, and to reteach it. And of course, we all want to be in the situation where there are things that we need to move on to. What is to be achieved? What are the complex tasks? Now, we don't want everything to be in the achieve basket, because sometimes that means the tasks are too easy. I want to recall Graham Nuttall's research. 50% of what's taught in every classroom, the kids know already. Wow, that's not going to work over distance. That's going to turn kids off and move them from striving and driving. And so how do we get the balance right? And quite frankly, there should be something in each of those cells as we go through. We should be listening all the time to not only the achieved, but to the strengths, and to the gaps, and to the achieved, and to the to be achieved. And that's the function of on the power of feedback. But to do all this, we need to start. We need to start in the first days of this new COVID situation as you go back in the spring and get that right. Nancy.
And John, I love that you talked so much about feedback, because feedback is essential at the teacher level and at the student level, but it's also essential at the organizational level. And at the school where Doug and I are, we're just finishing up our summer school. It'll be finished this Friday. And many of you, I imagine, have also had summer school running this year. That's feedback to you as an organization. It's your sandbox about how it is for those of you that are going forward in distance learning in the fall. What are the things that are working successfully and what still needs to be improved? We've gone through the first days of school in a smaller way 6 weeks ago with summer school. And that's really helping us to know what it is that we need to do going forward in the fall as we reestablish the first days of school again. And there are lots of considerations to make, and I encourage everyone to always think about how it is that you start school every year. All of that excitement that you have. I know for myself, I always think about what outfit am I going to wear, and I lay that out the night before, right? How am I going to meet my students? What am I going to say to them? How am I going to find out about them? None of that changes in a distance learning environment. So those rituals, those processes that you've utilized in the past, think closely about how it is that you can move those in to a distance learning environment. So as one example, we know that classrooms run better whenever there are norms that are set up and there are class agreements that are co-constructed with students that go along with those norms. A challenge that many of us had in the spring when we were all doing the crisis teaching was recognizing that we hadn't set up norms. We didn't have time to set up norms whenever we suddenly moved to this online environment. And so we kind of had to live with what those norms were. Going forward, we know it's absolutely critical to set up what those norms are. What are your expectations for your students? And then co-construct those agreements with your students so that they're positive, they're specific in nature, and most importantly, that they convey the high expectations that you have for them and for yourself, and also the mutual respect that you need to have in that classroom and that you really want to be able to encourage. Now, as one consideration, how might you convey what your norms are and your classroom agreements are as students prepare for those live synchronous sessions? So, for example, how are you going to make sure that your students know how they get ready for that classroom meeting, even clearing their learning space? Keep in mind that we can't do that quick scan around the classroom to make sure that they're all settled in. We need them to be able to do that. So that's an item to be able to convey. One of the things that we did in developing this playbook is that we also consulted with a primary instructional coach who works with teachers of primary age students. Claudia Reed-Wright has just been invaluable for this. And so this is one example. Then we've included them in modules throughout the book. This is one example when it comes to classroom agreements. What might those agreements look like for very young children? Taking those photos of kids, making sure that they know what's going to happen. And when you have a name like Read-Write, I think you are destined to be the teacher's teacher with all of this. I love the contributions that she's been able to make to this as well. Finally, in those first days of school, we also have to think about how considerate our learning management system is from the family standpoint, keeping in mind that many families will have several children in the home that are all participating in distance learning. And we need to make sure that we've got considerate websites that are available for them so that families, especially families with younger children, can quickly find where the information is, that there are expectations that are pretty similar across those platforms within a district, and that we provide schedules far in advance so that they can plan what's going on as well. Finally, we know that it's absolutely essential that you take care of yourself. And so, Doug, can you tell us some things about that?
Yes, I am. And Claudia Reedwright is on this meeting right now. I'm not sure people got a chance to see with one of the tools she created for video chats for young kids. What a cool tool that she created for young families. But how awesome is this that they had what are movement expectations, what are activities, and what are the conversations? And we do want to take care of ourselves, and as our colleague Ricky Robertson often says, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. We have to take care of ourselves as educators. These are trying times, anxiety-producing times, and many teachers are feeling a lack of agency. They feel that their efforts are not resulting in anything worth it. And it's not good for us. We have to look at the early wins. We have to stay connected to our colleagues. We need to still have our team meetings. We need to celebrate successes. We need to take care of ourselves. We need life-work balance. We need dedicated spaces that we allocate in our homes and set guidelines with our families around those spaces of work. We really need to think through our healthy practices so that we can take care of ourselves and we have a balance between our life and our work. And if we don't do that, we're probably not going to be good for our kids. We do need to take back our own lives and be balancing with that, set priorities and parameters and start times and stop times, etc. But schools are going to change, whether now or in the future. We can make better schools based on what we're learning. John?
Well, one of the things we're very keen for you to do as you go through the distance learning and the start of the school year, we want to keep a bit of a diary. I'd love you to keep it, every teacher, to end up writing maybe 1 or 2 pages of what really worked well during the distance learning COVID period. Now, I'm not being Pollyanna here. I also know that things won't work so well. But keeping a tab of what works. Now, when they then come back to in class, I'm sure as Doug and Nancy have talked about, that first month is pretty critical to establish the relationships, deal with the well-being. But I do remind you of Morris Galton's work about the best predictor of success when a kid changes school, changes a class, comes back from a long period of summer holidays and now COVID. It's whether they make a friend in the first month. That sense of belonging in the class. But I'd love you to keep a tab of all that works so that when the in-class comes back, we do sit down as a team and we work about how we can change the old grammar schooling and have a new grammar schooling. How we can build back better. How we can't go back. We shouldn't go back to us talking 80 to 90% of the time, but making sure the students are engaged in learning 80 to 90% of the time. We should worry more about the feedback that's received and getting kids to talk about what they know and don't know, their gaps and their strengths. How can we look at the nature of the structure of the tasks that we now give kids so that we move from the surface to the deep? How can we make sure as we come back that we talk about efficiency as well as effectiveness? It's fascinating that 1 in 3 teachers in teacher education in your country and mine are doing their teacher education course online. What an incredible opportunity. And as we noted right at the very start, the world has become socially connected. Certainly our kids and our young people are. What you're doing through the distance learning model can become very much integrated into the new normal. How do we get it so that even within the school, the students don't necessarily have to be in front of us all the time? We're not necessarily directors of their learning. We all know the jargon word, self-regulation. How do we teach kids to self-regulate. And the only way to do that is to deliberately teach them to do it and not have them dependent on us at all the time, as they will not be through the distance learning mode. And how we listen to our students of what they profited from during the COVID experience that we want to bring back better. So don't see this as an aberration moving forward, but as an opportunity to really dramatically improve the nature of the quality of the learning lives of all our students as they go through not only this incredible unplanned experiment called COVID, but as we bring them back into our future. So we see this as an opportunity. We see this as a chance to reinvigorate what I'm sure everyone on this seminar today sees as desirable ways of teaching and desirable ways of learning. So take the opportunity, see this as a new grammar of schooling. Of course, worry about the students, which may not be doing so well under these circumstances, but also worry about those who do incredibly well so that we do bring back better. Now, at this point, we're going to turn to Amanda. At the start of this, she had a hurricane go through her area, which led to some sound problems. Amanda, we're hoping that the hurricane is gone and that we can bring you back into the sound box, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, that's much better.
Oh, great. Hi, everyone. It's Monica Ekman again. I want to thank Dr. Fisher, Dr. Fry, and Dr. Hattie for an exceptional, thorough, and helpful presentation on one of the most critical global topics, distance learning. Thank you. Now we'd love to open it up to questions. We see that many of you have asked questions in the Q&A chat, and the authors would be happy to start answering some of those, and of course we'll follow up with any that we can't cover in a follow-up email. Please, authors, go ahead.
I see a lot of thank you for the webinar. Thank you very much. If there are questions, you can certainly ask us.
Doug, you probably did what I did. You're looking in the chat room. If you go to the Q&A room, lots of questions. And the one that comes up quite a lot is about what it looks like in early childhood and kindergarten. And that's very dear to my heart because I have 3 of my kids who are teachers and 2 of them teach in that area. And certainly it is much harder because of the nature of those kids and the notion of self-regulation. But the other side of it we know with those kids is they are probably the best teachers of each other and the best teachers of other kids. It's sad in a way that by about the age of 8 or 9, they start to think that the teacher's job is the one standing in the front of the room. But if you think of the concept of self-regulation, it does mean when we can teach ourselves. And so that's what we need to optimize with that younger group. And what we'll find is that they are sometimes so much more efficient at doing the tasks than some of the older kids because they are prepared to, and they love, oh my gosh, they love moving from participating to that investing and that striving. And so again, it's going to think about, you're going to have to think very clearly about the nature of the tasks we give them, how we can get the kids working to each other. Like they go to kindergarten to be with their friends much more than any other age group. And so how do we optimize on that? So yes, and we have got some recommendations in the distance book for that particular group, but it's the same kind of messages.
Yep. There's a question about what's the first things that teachers should be doing now. So like, what should they be doing right now before kids come back to school?
Yep. You're making that a rhetorical question, Douglas, or you're asking?
No, I'm asking you. I'm asking you.
Right. Oh, look, the most important thing to remember, teachers, is that in the normal world, this is holiday time. You really do have to think of how we recharge our batteries, because that's the point of holidays. And so trying to take the stress and worry out and making sure that you do have some time for yourselves, you do have some time for your family, that's probably the most important message right now. But in terms of preparing, as you would do a normal year, it is about how we can think about the structure of the success we want, starting with backwards, starting with what do we want them to be successful in the lessons. And don't forget that amongst the most powerful influences is teachers' collective efficacy. Don't do it alone. This is the time where teachers can work together and share things. And you'll find that sharing things across grade level teachers and then adapting it for your kids is much easier to do and much more effective to do on the distance learning than when you have to sit down about how can I get the kids engaged in doing the whole day. You don't have to do that anymore. I had a comment recently from a teacher in Australia here where it was on the media saying the kids are only learning about 2 hours a day at home. And my comment is, for many kids, that's more than they learn in the 5 or 6 hours we have in the classroom. So think of it in terms of how do we structure towards the success that we want and be delighted if they do it faster. And so preparing those kind of notions is probably much more important than worrying about the media, how we get kids to talk to each other and create that sense of belonging over the internet so they feel like they belong in a group of kids. When they first come back, they'll meet kids they've never seen before because that's what happens at the start of many school years. How do you create that environment and create a social environment where it's safe to ask the kinds of questions? So that's where I'd be starting.
Awesome.
I'm also seeing lots of questions in here about how you prioritize what it is that you're doing in a live session versus asynchronously. And one of the things that I think about in particular are what are the things that can uniquely be done within that setting. And that has a lot to do with peer-to-peer collaboration. What are the collaboration opportunities that students are going to have in that live session? And depending on what your platform or what your learning management system is, there are tools in there to be able to create opportunities for students to be able to collaborate. One of the things that we've found to be successful is in identifying as a school what would be some of our spotlight collaboration practices, and then making sure that every adult in the school knows how to utilize them so that every student in the school knows how to utilize them. And having some of those go-to collaboration activities that everybody knows how to use is going to make the time that you have for student collaboration in that live session much more efficient because kids know what to do.
Well, thank you, everyone, for your questions, and to our presenters for your helpful answers. I'd like to take a few minutes to share how to access the book. I saw that question in the chat, and opportunities to connect with the authors. So you can see on the screen, this is the tool for putting into practice what you began to learn today, the Distance Learning Playbook. Please take a photo of the screen and save the URL and the promotional code for a 30% discount. The Corwin Book Clubs offer another opportunity for you to learn from the authors up close and personal. You can buy the book and attend one of these book clubs for deeper learning, a chance to collaborate, share ideas with other educators, and to ask authors questions. Again, please take a photo of the screen to save the URL, and note that there are 2 clubs, one for teachers and one for leaders. And lastly, other ways to deepen your understanding on distance learning are through our virtual workshops and institutes. There are multi-day virtual workshops or single-day intensive institutes. Please visit the website on the screen, www.corwin.com/the Distance Learning Playbook. And that's a wrap. Thank you again to our wonderful presenters and to all of you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you. And Monica, I just want to, the book club was technically closed, but this morning we reopened it, so there is still space for the book club if anybody is interested.
Fantastic, Doug. We have